to play devil's advocate, doesn't bring in Brian Daboll because you'll hear the shorthand RPOs, right? That stands for read pass option for those of you keeping score at home. Doesn't that fit a little bit more to what you'd have to do to make Taylor? That's what I said.
You said read.
Oh, well, it's read. Okay. You're going to hear...
You like to read and then do run pass, but...
Yeah. So it's run pass option.
I'm getting beat up in the car now because I corrected him twice.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, on the Bluetooth breakdown today, we got the host of the Huddle for Rock Sports Network, along with Icy Vic. They just had their season finale this last weekend out at 34 Rush in Batavia Downs. Let's cover Bills camp. We've been at Bills camp with Ryan for the last few years, bringing Bills fans exclusive content multiple days a week. The Charlie Steiner of your local sports.
Follow me to freedom.
Rock Sports Ryan Lasal. Ryan, dude, thank you for joining us today. How you doing, man?
So, Ryan, I think a lot of Bills fans are curious. We mentioned that you've been at Bills camp for the past few years. Covering it day to day and giving the fans, great content of what's going on day to day with the Buffalo Bills and the training camp and stuff. And, to me, it almost seems like the three words that people have been saying is almost the punchline now in Buffalo: trust the process. Being at camp the last few years, when Ryan was there and now that McDermott's there, what are some of the big changes that you've seen in camp?
Yeah, well, I think, you joke around about trusting the process, but, you hear people in the media using it, a lot, and the reason for that is we've kind of all seen the process. McDermott comes in, and one of the first things he does is publicly remove the games from the locker room, and they take out the ping pong table and, get rid of that stuff. And then in camp, it's noticeably different. Guys don't walk between drills. They don't, there's a marked increase in intensity in practice, which was something that I think a lot of us were all concerned with when Rex Ryan was there. It just seems like this was practice. It wasn't anything that was taken very seriously under Rex Ryan. And McDermott has kind of changed that culture, and practice is important. You get your reps, you run to the next section of the practice camp, and you see guys before you're traded, you even saw guys standing running, and that wasn't something you typically saw when it came to in between practice stuff over the last couple of years. So I think that the process, albeit a joke, I think it is. There's some realness to it, and it's continuing the process and practice. Mario, from growing up playing sports, right? You play the way you practice.
Absolutely.
So it's important to keep that mentality, and McDermott does that. And that's his process, and you can't argue with the results so far, at least.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I like the way that you end that. You can't argue with the results. This is not a Charlie Weiss and Notre Dame situation where Charlie Weiss came in, won a bunch of games, got a contract extension, and then everybody realized he didn't know how to recruit. This team was a total turnover from top to bottom from the roster that we saw at the end of the previous season. Now, of course, you had your foundational players that stayed, but this is not the same team that was here last year. So you can't say that McDermott took over a squad that had the ability to do what they did this year. It's not even remotely close to the same. So if you had to list the top three additions this season, who do you think your top three additions would be that made the biggest impact to get the Bills to where they are right now?
Well, I think number one, and I think this is a really undersold point regarding him, number one I think has to be Micah Hyde. Not only because of what he brought to that secondary, but if you listen to his comments at the end of the season, I don't think he got enough coverage for it. Micah Hyde said after the season was over, free agents don't want to come to Buffalo. I didn't want to come to Buffalo. But once you get here, he said you'll never find another place that you want to play in the NFL. But not only would he a huge impact on the field, but to say something like that off the field about free agents and say, hey guys, I know you don't want to come here. I didn't want to come here, but they gave me money, so I came, and I love it. You know, you want to see how much that's going to help the free agent recruiting process when it comes to Buffalo, because they're not a very cap-friendly situation right now. So they're going to need to find guys that they don't have to overpay for, as Buffalo has had to do in the past. So I think Micah Hyde for sure. Next to him, Jordan Poyer. I mean, you know, again, you can't argue with the results. This is a guy who had a lot of question marks coming in. You know, he's coming from the Browns. How good can you really be? They didn't really seem to address the safety position outside of him, so you knew he was going to be the starter, and he stepped up. You know, he's been arguably a Pro Bowl player. He got some up for sure. So those two on the back end, I think, were huge additions. You know, and then I think an undersold addition to the team was Vlad Dukas. I mean, albeit at the beginning of the season he was kind of a punching bag for the media and for fans because he wasn't playing great. But down the stretch, I mean, he played some really good football in the last 4 to 5 games this past season. And one of the huge reasons that they made the playoffs is they had the ability to run off that right side, and that was right over his backside that they were able to run the football towards the end of the season. And that, you know, you watch that Indianapolis game, almost every big run McCoy had was over that right side. And I think that was a huge moment for Dukas. I don't think he's back next season just because of the cap hit and the scheme that they're going to be switching to under Dable. But, you know, I thought he played really well for a team that was in flux at that position.
Now, you talked about the addition of Poyer and Hyde and those guys. My question is this, is because we're entering technically the first draft of Beam, you know, because as we talked about before, Whaley and in the scouting department, those guys did all the homework prior to the last draft. So coming into this draft and maybe the offseason and the free agents, how much of that do you think was McDermott and Bean just keeping their eyes open around the league, or do you think it was just something that was the Whaley staff had in mind about a Hyde or a Poyer or those guys? Do you think it was, who do you think was really the catalyst in that?
Well, I think, you know, you look at the signings, and Hyde and Poyer were both signed before Whaley left. So I think it's difficult to not at least give him some credit for it because, you know, ultimately the GM is the guy that's got to go out and get pen to paper. But when you look at the way the rest of the draft kind of played out and the free agent signings and the trades that took place this offseason, I don't think there's anyone who would argue that McDermott had a huge hand in Poyer and Hyde, because McDermott's a guy who knows what he needs. I mean, he clearly is a guy who understands his defensive scheme, understands the players that he needs to execute it. He saw those two guys, and he said, those are two guys that I need. And you know, maybe it was something that Whaley came up to him and said, hey, I put a call into Micah Hyde. What do you think before I take this thing any further? And it could have been the other way, where it said McDermott said, hey, I need a guy like Hyde. Go get him for me. You know, so I think it was probably 60-40 McDermott, if I had to take a guess, because again, you know, the coach is the guy that's got to identify the player and that he's going to fit the scheme, and then the GM's got to be the guy to go close the deal. So, you know, I've been a Whaley supporter for a long time. I think his biggest problem was he couldn't find a quarterback, and that's the bane of any GM's, you know, existence. If you can't find a quarterback, you're not going to have a job very long. So, but other than that, I mean, I thought Whaley did some really good things in Buffalo, and if Poyer and Hyde are his lasting impression on the team, then, you know, I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah, that's. I just wanted to. I didn't mean to bring up any like old news like that, but I don't think. I mean, because Whaley is no longer in Buffalo, a lot of people are down on him, and I knew you were a supporter of him. I was a supporter of Whaley. I mean, you just look at the track record of the players that he has that are still starters around the league. I mean, he could identify talent. Maybe it just wasn't for the coach that he had or the system or the scheme that was going on, but he definitely was a guy that could identify talent. I mean, what there's like 5 players in the Super Bowl night right now that he drafted in Buffalo.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, linebackers, corners. If you needed them, Whaley was the guy to go find them. Quarterbacks, not so much. Didn't have a good track record behind quarterbacks.
Yeah.
You know, when you have to hang your hat on E.J. Manuel, that's the problem.
Hey.
Well, I remember, you know, when we did the draft show down at, you know, 34 Rush with you and Spencer German and Icy, which was obviously a great honor. Anytime you get to do any draft coverage is always a great honor. But I remember when the Bills traded down, the look in your eye was they're going to go get their guy next year. That was your initial impression. You could see it right on your face that as soon as the Bills had announced that they traded down. And it was funny because I saw that on your face, and then I immediately looked at Mario, and Mario's first impression was, it's the connection between McDermott and Andy Reid that got this deal done, because there's a definitive connection between McDermott and Andy Reid as far as the coaching tree goes. They know each other very well. They work together for a long time. So there's a definite connection. Who would have thought that the two picks that were ultimately traded, right, would end up this year being 21 and 22? So we thought the Bills were aiming to get a pick in the top 10 and then into the top 20. And both picks fall outside of the top 20. So how, from a plan perspective, do you think that changes things? Because I really do feel when the Bills made that trade, they anticipated at least one of those picks falling within the top 10, right? You have a team that's asking for a pick to go get a quarterback. You have to assume that they're not going to be very good that year, right? And turns out KC rolls with Alex Smith. They let Mahomes sit. And then KC and the Bills go 21-22. So how do you think that changed over the course of the season?
Yeah, I think it was a twofold situation, right? Because we talked about it right on the draft show, and funny you brought it up. I was watching it, re-listening to it the other day, and that the trade came through, and we talked about it and said, Bills top 10, maybe 12 at the lowest is where Bills are going to draft, because we didn't have a lot of expectations for that team. And then we talked about the Kansas City Chiefs playing in the AFC West, and we thought that division was going to be better than it was. Oakland had just come off of a good season. They were returning all of their offensive starters, adding Marshawn Lynch. There was no reason to think that they were going to take the step back that they did. And then you look at San Diego, and they're Los Angeles now. They were always a team that was kind of right there, and you figure if, Oakland was going to win the division, and then if, LA could steal a wild card spot from Kansas City, you're drafting, in the 18-19 with that Kansas City pick. If you talk about 12 and 19 gets you the top 3. I don't think there's much debate in regards to that. But 21-22, if you're planning on trading up still, it's going to take some ammunition. You look at what the Kansas City Chiefs gave up last year to get to 10 for the Buffalo Bills, right? They went from 27 to 10, and it took them essentially 2 firsts and a third, and I believe a fifth is what they wound up giving up last year for that trade up for Buffalo. So if you're talking about a team for Buffalo to go from 21 to maybe 2 with the New York Giants, you've got that Gettleman-McBean connection. That could potentially be a landing spot for them. It's going to take 21, 22, probably next year's first, and that's at least where the bidding is going to start for Bills to move up. So I think it definitely changes the narrative for Bean, but I don't think it changes his desire to go up and get one of his guys. This is still the strongest quarterback class that we've seen in a long time. There's still a lot of talent, and there's still a lot of potential out there. But if you plan on waiting around for a second-round pick, like I've heard some of the Bills fans say, don't forget, you're drafting low in the second round, too. So don't think you're going to sit around and wait for these guys to fall, because it's just not going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks taken this year in the first round.
Yeah, and I'm with you there, Ryan, because if the Bills had a top 12 third round pick or second round pick, they could probably get away with dealing a 1 and 2 this year, and then probably a second the following year to move up, because I think the draft capital will be there. But you're buried in each of the first 3 rounds as far as overall picks go. So that's why you see teams giving up future firsts, because that future first is going to carry more long-term value than a low second, right? So that's why you see teams give up that future first. I hope the Bills don't put themselves in a position where they do that. I hate when they give up future firsts, because we've seen what happens, right? Who are the picks that came off future first? Roscoe Parrish, right? And Ronald Darby. And I don't want another year of that. Don't sign me up for that.
If they think that their guy is Josh Rosen, right, or Baker Mayfield, and there's an opportunity, Sam Darnold goes first. I have Sam Darnold going first in my mock draft, so I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. If Rosen's sitting there at 2, and you've got a connection between Bean and Gettleman, And Gettleman says, we're not going quarterback. You know, gamesmanship, I think, set aside, you know, he may have some honesty with Bean. If they're not going to go quarterback and they're willing to trade and Rosen's there and he's your guy, and everything you've done says he's the guy that's going to be the 10-year franchise guy, you know, in this NFL, and he's by far number one on our board. I mean, the Bills have sat in quarterback purgatory for 19 seasons. You've got to go get him, and if it means next year's first, and that's what it takes to go get the guy that you need. Listen, you're not signing Kirk Cousins, right? You're with the retirement of Eric Wood, you're not going to go get Kirk Cousins, Alex Smith. You're just not going to go get those guys because you don't have the cap room to go do it. So if the alternative is Josh Rosen and bring in Nick Foles as your backup, you bring in whoever as the backup. Go get them, because you waited so long, and you can't just sit and hope a guy falls to you at 21, 22. I think you've got to go get your guy. So I understand where you're coming from. I don't like trading future ones either, but you need a quarterback in Buffalo. I mean, it's the one thing. How many seasons have we sat here and said they're a quarterback away, right? You've got to go get your guy, and if your guy's at 2, and you've got to go 2 firsts, next year's first, and next year's, you know, 4th, go get it.
Ryan, I want to thank you for your time today, coming on with us for the Bluetooth breakdown. Always enjoy talking football with you, man, and I can't wait till we have the draft show and do this verbal kind of bantering in person.
Yeah, I mean, the draft show is a great time for anyone listening. If you mark it on your calendar. I think it's April. Oh God, it's the end of April for sure. The draft. I'm pulling up my calendar here. It's going to be April 26th and 27th, which is Thursday, Friday. It's going to be the first round, and then second, third round. We're going to be out at 34 Rush at Batavia Downs, just off Through Exit 48. So make sure you come out and check it out. You're going to have Mario, Paul going to be with us. Hopefully both nights. I haven't got a chance to talk to you guys about that, but hopefully both nights we'll have the crew together and we'll be having some fun, giving some things away, eating some food, and breaking down the draft. So, last year's show was a great time, and looking forward to it again this year. So thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it, and love your show. First time, long time, so thanks for having me on. After you finish listening to Mario and Paul, head on over to YouTube on Rock Sports Network and check out that show as well. So that's where you find me, and feel free to shoot me some constructive criticism on Twitter, and I'll be sure to be polite and professional as I always am back here.